Peggy has lived in Avon for 45 years. Please welcome Peggy Duncaster, who will tell us more about her incredible art. Peggy, we are so honored to have you.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, Lee, for inviting me. Kathy, for shepherding me through the process. All of your technical support throughout the building. The amazing installation committee. They really have their game figured out. It's been a really efficient and welcoming place to show art. So I have a history of about 50 years in the fiber arts, going back to college where I learned to do needlepoint and crochet. And then into the 1970s, I became a big fan of macrame, really some intricate knotting. I did all of the drapes and window treatments in our first home in Avon. And this is an example of macrame. This used to be in our bathroom window. What I love about macrame still, and I incorporate a lot of it in my work, is I use it in finishing most of my beadwork. So also in my beadwork, I want to point out, in the bead weavings that I do on a loom, you'll see these metal strips. I'm doing a little show and tell first. These metal strips I find in the road when I walk, and they break off of the snow plows. I mean, no, I'm wrong. They break off of the street sweepers. And I have friends who gather these for me. I have some cities I could recommend if anybody needs these. Dublin is full of them. So you'll see these in my work as well. Another show and tell that I brought today is a small bead loom. This is they're called Indian bead looms, and this is where I got my start in bead weaving. And that was in the early 90s, maybe late 80s, early 90s. So I really, in the early 1980s, we had moved to Avon in late 70s. In the early 80s, when I was driving through Avon, I found a sign on Main Street that somebody was giving weaving lessons, and her name was Jackie Hurlth, and she owned a shop called Silver Needles. So I went in there and for a couple of years, took weaving lessons with her. I acquired 8-harness 45-inch loom that I could work on. I had a 60-inch tapestry upright loom, and for basically, I'm going to say 15 years, I was really heavy into weaving. I did a lot of home items, pillows, blankets, placemats, things like that. And then in the late 80s, so here's an example of tapestry while I'm talking about it. This was on my loom when we moved from one house to another in Avon, and it was intended to be a rug, but I had to take it off the loom to move, so this is all it became. It's a runner of sorts. But it's an example. So in the late 80s, I had gone into one of the art shows and saw paper weaving in a really abstract fashion design. And I was struck by that. And so I started to do some paper weaving at that point, and into the early 90s, a lot of paper weaving. And at the same time, I picked up an Indian bead loom and started to do that as well. In the mid-90s, I joined the Canton Art Guild and started to exhibit at Gallery on the Green in Canton. And that was when I first considered myself an up-and-coming artist. So really from the mid-90s on is, when I really got more serious. I was working full-time, so my output was so-so. But as years have gone by, it's really accumulated. So anyway, I'm going to take you through the work that's in the show. It's called Pop Down Memory Lane, because I thought many of the images that I selected for the show would speak to our memories. And as you can see also, I'm a very big fan of pop art. and I do a lot of pop art images. So there are, I think, 32 pieces in the show. I'm going to talk about 31 of them briefly on each slide, and then if you have questions after I'm done with that, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you.
So let's get the order here. Okay, my cup of tea. So I have a fondness when I see that a manufacturer is changing the product description, or changing the box, or changing the label. I tend to like to memorialize the outgoing item. And in this case, Red Rose, which I'm a big fan of. I drink Red Rose tea nonstop every day. I'm a big fan of it, and I wanted to memorialize the box. So this is a bead mosaic that's done right on top of the Red Rose tea box. And then it's surrounded by the cardboard tea tags that were on the tea bags at the time that this piece was done, which was 2005. The tags are in a grid that's established by having yarn or string attached, collaged down to canvas, and then creating that grid. This piece is called Lighten Up, and I am not a smoker. I was back in my youth, but in 2005, I did this piece on a loom, on a small bead loom, and and at the time, this design came from a Marlboro ad in a magazine. Now, what I want to remark about that is that we don't see cigarette ads, thankfully, in magazines anymore. That's not allowed. And it was also a time when the Surgeon General warning was very, very slight. I mean, cigarettes could cause low fetal birth rate. Now, a cigarette warning says cigarettes cause cancer, cigarettes cause heart attacks, cigarettes will kill you. So we've come a long way with the smoking. And in this piece, it was, just a sign of the times. Next. Okay, this one is Sergeant Peggy's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and it is done right on top of the Beatles album itself. So this cover is a bead mosaic mostly, and it's got a lot of mixed media elements in it. It's got miniature dolls and doll hands. It's got little musical instruments. The doll hands come from all the Barbies in the basement and that are no longer have hands on them. And the center drum head is embroidered and says Sergeant Peggy's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Another little add-on to know is on the back of this piece, there's an envelope, and in the envelope there is a legend of all the portraits that are in the album. So it's a little map with all the faces on it, and it tells you which individual is in what portrait. So this Monopoly game box is a mosaic, and it's done right on top of the box itself. They are tiny seed beads. There's also some pearls, some crystals, a matchbox car. It's the 1978 edition of Monopoly, glued down and in a shadow box frame. The glue that I used back then was probably Elmer's. Nowadays, I use something called Aleene's Quick Dry glue. So this is an homage to Michael Jackson. It's loom woven with seed beads and found metal strips, the tangs that I told you about that come from the street sweeper. This is from 2010. So Michael Jackson, I wanted to talk a little bit about portraits, because what happens with my experience with portraits is I can execute a portrait and a couple years later, that person's canceled. And it's like, oh, no one wants to see that person anymore. So Michael Jackson is somewhat out of favor, but as a child, he was a pretty innocent individual, and you know, you can't take away from the talent and the music. So this piece is from a Picasso painting called Le Rêve, and I've titled it Le Rêve Reversed because it is a mirror image of the original painting. I've just flipped it and did a reversed image. It has an interesting backstory. This is a densely embroidered piece with some buttons and beads. But there's an interesting story to this painting. This painting, the Picasso painting, belonged to a casino magnate named Steve Wynn, and he was in the process of selling it to another casino magnate, Steve Cohen, for a price of $139 million. Now, Steve Wynn was telling people about the impending sale, and he was gesturing and talking, and he put his elbow right through the painting. Oh. They called it the $40 million elbow. Needless to say, the sale was off. However, years went by, the painting got mended, and actually, from the 2006 sale of $139 million that didn't go, it was sold to the same person in 2013 for $155 million. So I guess he didn't do that much damage with his elbow. So anyway, I really, I'm a Picasso fan. I like the abstract images, so that's why I chose this one. Who doesn't remember Spanky and our gang, and of course Alfalfa? So this is, okay, so in 2011, from 2011 to about 2013, I started taking oil painting classes with Jenny Knaus from Canton, Connecticut. Jenny is an unbelievably talented painter. But anyway, I started to dabble. I really literally became a Sunday painter, where I would just go up to the attic on Sunday mornings and then, do a little painting, let it dry, and a week later go and do some more. So I did that for a couple of years, so you'll see a few paintings. I don't really paint much anymore. But anyway, when I do paint, I usually, when there's an application in Photoshop called cutouts, and when I use the cutout filter, I can break a face into the planes of the face, so you can see where the color changes are. So in this particular painting, with the cutout feature, I stitched around the planes of the face first, and then painted into the sections, and that's how this is done. He's in black and white because that's all he ever was in. This is 1950s television. I've never seen him in color. So, but I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Alfalfa. Cowboy Neil, this is my husband Neil, he's behind the camera here in the middle. This is him as a child. Now, if you grew up in 1950s, many of you as a boy may have had the cowboy hat, the holster with the guns. So that was the go-to costume in that day. So there's a lot of stitching in this as well around the cowboy hat, the strings that hold the cowboy hat to the neck are embedded in the paint, as well as the little bead that holds the string and the button on the shirt, all using paint to hold the items. There's a lot of stitching on the outline of the cowboy as well. And this piece is from 2011. The Mad Hatter. What I like to say about this piece, this attribution, so attributing to many artists that came before me, starting with Lewis Carroll, who wrote the book, and then going on to Tim Burton, who conceived the film, to Johnny Depp, who portrayed the character, and most of all, to Colleen Atwood, who designed the costume. And then I come along and put it all together on canvas. In this, there's feathers, there's hat pins, there's beads, there's ribbons, all adhered with paint. Well, I think the pins are probably stuck through the canvas, but yeah. It was a fun piece to do. Speedy Alka-Seltzer. There's two versions of Speedy in this show. This particular one is woven, loom woven, with seed beads and metal tangs. And this one is painted, and it's oil paint on canvas board, and there's seed beads in this as well. So the black television that you're looking at is completely outlined in beads. And the writing on the hat that says Speedy Alka-Seltzer, and the Alka-Seltzer on the figure itself is all done in beads that are adhered to paint. Maybe I glued the beads on first and then painted around them. I don't remember exactly. This is from 2013. Cerulean Andy. So another time I've used the Photoshop filter to determine the planes of the face, and then the different color sections are stitched with embroidered first, and then I paint into the various sections. And this Andy Warhol portrait was done based on an image that was photographed by Richard Avedon, who's a very famous celebrity, was a famous celebrity photographer. I'm not sure if he's still alive. Miss Marty, Marimekko, and Birkenstocks on linoleum. So this is a loom woven bead piece, and this was designed and adapted from a photograph that a woman in Australia took of a selfie of her shoes, which was big in the day, maybe 2013, people were taking a lot of selfies of their feet. Anyway, she gave me permission to use this for my bead design, and I just love the linoleum. I love the Marimekko fabrics of the 60s, so, and of course Birkenstocks are good too. So that was the desire that made me do this piece. It's one of my favorites, actually. Control valve. So this metal sign that says control valve was gifted to me by my husband's cousin. He worked in building maintenance, and he also gave me a main drain sign at the time, and the main drain piece went into a bead weaving that had the image of a very open, large mouth. Apple ID. This is a portrait of Steve Jobs. It was adapted from a 1984 photograph by Norman Seeff. It's the same photo that appears on the book jacket of the biography by Walter Isaacson. Old Maid. I mean, this was such a terrible game. You really think about the concept of it. Although I have to admit, I still play it with my grandchildren. They enjoy it, but I give them some caveats about, women are not old maids just because they didn't get married. Anyway, I have a very extensive political pin collection, and I thought putting one of those pins into this piece was a very appropriate use of it. So this has the woven seed beads, the macrame knotting, and the metal button, as well as the tangs. Leading lady. So Michelle Obama is loom woven, and this, let me find this, hold on. Okay, this design is adapted from a photo by Art Strieber of Variety magazine, and it's got seed beads. There's a crystal where her engagement ring would be, or her diamond ring would be. It's got some metal. When I did this piece, I struggled with colors because there was so much brown in the hair. I didn't know what to use for the face, so I settled on purple, and I'm happy with it. Purple's for royalty, as she is. Yes. Excuse me. Hairdo. So this particular bead mosaic is done right on top of a '78 photo album Well, it's actually, there's a cartoon of the image first, you know, printed image that's put on top of the phonograph record, and then I do a bead mosaic right on top of the cartoon. And it starts in the center and it goes circularly around and around and around towards the outer edge. The original design for this was of a backlit Steve Curry, who I guess was in the original Broadway show, and that was created by an Alexius Rispoli Rodriguez. Domestic Bliss. So this is a collage that's done on faux leather. The paper that you're looking at comes from probably a 1950s, maybe a 1960s catalog that was directed to home housekeepers, women of that era, and you know how they can keep a better home was the message on a lot of these pages. So it's adhered to faux leather, and then the images that are embroidered into each page reflect something that's written on the paper itself. So never scrub your toilets again. And you can see that there's a toilet bowl and a scrubber in the image. The pages are then assembled by a zipper that connects one page to the next, and then the whole thing is encircled by crochet. And that piece is 2018. This American Life is from vintage beads, from vintage Milton Bradley bingo cards, and I just used various images that I, you know, encounter in my life and that we all encounter in our lives, and embroidered them, painted them. There's some markers on them, there's some sequins. There's just a variety of materials in this piece. And, you know, it's on the larger side, but I like this piece a lot. I had done this piece in 2019, and I just had to take it out of the frame and redo a lot of the colors, because I guess some of the markers I used faded over time. Even though all of these pieces are under UV glass, they still can fade. So I took it out of the frame, and my girlfriend and I went back in and with a lot of colored pencils and, you know, strengthened some of the colors. So that was last week's project. Parcheesi. This was a labor of love, let me say. This started probably 10 years ago. The center area is embroidered and painted, but the embroidery is done with sewing thread. And it was just taking forever. And I abandoned it, and I hadn't finished the center, I put it away. You know, there's an expression in weaving, when you start a project and you don't like it, we call it a dog on the loom. I thought of this as a dog on the loom. I just couldn't deal with it. And then I retired for good in 2017 and, you know, started working on it again. So I did finish it finally. So the outside, after the center was done, the board itself is bead mosaic. There's metal letters in this that spell out Parcheesi. They go clockwise from left to right, and there's 3 original game pieces as well glued into it. It's in a shadow box frame. Mario and Friends is from 2019, and I did bring the cartoon that I used for this. So when I work on a loom, how I work on it is by print. You can't see this, I know you can't, but I work from a printed image from the computer, and then what I do is I put I put a bead graph on top of it, so I will know that each space in that graph will hold a bead, and that's how I can execute the design. This design came from a tag that was this big that came on a huge stuffed animal that my daughter won at a carnival at the Santa Monica Pier. That was 20 years ago, and this piece was done from this image in 2019. So I held on to that tag quite a bit. My daughter's moved out, but Mario's still in the upstairs bedroom. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, another portrait. So I finished this in February of 2020, and in September of 2020, RBG passed away. She just accomplished so much in her life. She was a trailblazer, and what she did for us was amazing. But you know, she too is now suffering a little bit from cancel culture because people are starting to complain that she didn't retire soon enough. So this whole thing with this cancel culture has me thinking, do I ever even want to do portraits again? I did a portrait of Woody Allen years ago, and when I did it, he was fine. I was fine. It got into a lot of shows. It might have even had awards. Now he's not even in the frame anymore. I repurposed his frame. So it's a problem, I think, with portraits. So I just wanted to make that point. But I'm happy with Bader Ginsburg, and it's because Lee Good saw her at West Hartford Art League that I'm here today. Roy's bathroom is an homage to the artist Roy Lichtenstein. So he did a painting, a much larger painting of this image, and I admire Roy Lichtenstein. And so the way this is all embroidery, and the way it was done was there's a fabric called Solvay, it's dissolvable, and I print the image on that fabric, I adhere the fabric to canvas, I stitch through the whole thing, and then I put it in water and the dissolvable Solvay just disappears and I'm only left with the beads and the threads. So that's how I transferred the image that went into this piece. There's a lot of beadwork around the border. That's peyote stitched, hand-stitched beadwork. Chutes and Ladders is a vintage game box. It's again a mosaic done upon the box, and it is from 2020. And the box is mounted on foam core. There's some sequins in the Chutes and Ladders flag as well. So soda pop, who remembers when it was 5 cents? And you needed a bottle opener to get the cap off? So this is a bead mosaic. Again, this one's done on a 45 vinyl record. And again, working from the center, you can see the center hole where the record would have been. Go work rounding from the center outward to the edge. Crayola is another one of my very favorite pieces, although it was somewhat of a dog on the loom too. The color changes in this, if you can anticipate that each little graph square holds a bead, as I went along every row, the color changes were enormous. And when I was doing the crayon part, but I did stick with it. When I got to the yellow and green, it was a lot easier to work on. And I'm glad I did because I'm really happy with how it came out. And this one really, I mean, who didn't have a box of the 64 with the sharpener, right? I mean, we all had one of those. So, Alfred Hitchcock. This is called Screenshot, and it's beads and sequins stitched into cotton rag paper. My current focus in my studio is very much on sequins. So this was just a simpler kind of sequin piece. Every sequin, the way I stitch sequins is I go through the hole in the sequin, I pick up a bead, and then I go back down through the hole in the sequin, and that bead is what holds the sequin onto the paper or the fabric. So there's a little writing in here that says Screenshot, which was just serendipity. When I printed the screenshot on my computer, the word screenshot showed up in the bottom right corner, and I thought, well, that's fitting, and so I left it. Non-conforming. So in
This is from 2022. In 2021, Hasbro went gender neutral with their potato heads. And this is a reflection of that. It's adapted with permission from an Instagram photographer who had actually built this particular potato head. And I asked him if I could use the image, and he was very happily giving to me. So that's what that's from, 2022. And Bazooka, which is the last piece I finished in 2022 and the last piece I'm going to talk about. This is bead embroidery on fabric. Who remembers the Bazooka for 1 or 2 cents with the Bazooka joke comic inside? I know one of my guests here today says her dentist loved that she loved Bazooka. So that wraps up my presentation from my slides, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and I really appreciate your patience, and you're tripping down memory lane with me. Oh, boy, I forgot one.
Does anyone have any questions?
Did I forget M&M's?
Yeah.
Another one. Okay, so M&M speaks for itself. Oh, thank you very much.
Hey, right. Yes.
How do you deal with copyright laws?
I haven't been challenged on it. I don't mass produce, so I try to attribute whenever I can. When I post these online in my website, I always attribute, and I don't make prints of these things or try to sell them. If I was challenged, it's a different medium, definitely, from all of the images that I've borrowed, but I'm not the only one painting Andy Warhol or even Michelle Obama, I'm sure, but it's a concern. I do not own these images, many of them. They are, the public owns a lot of them, but and some of them are past their dates, but I haven't had to deal with it.
We're not gonna share it.
Does anyone else have a question?
It's a beautiful presentation.
Oh,
Thank you.
Beautiful
Thank you.
presentation.
How about your eyesight? When do you
Oh,
work, like,
I get that question a lot. When I work with seed beads, I wear 2 pairs of reading glasses, one on top of another. And it works really well for me because it just turns when my head turns, and so far so good. So,
Thank you all for coming.
thank you.